Hello and welcome to another Miami Hal real estate show. As you can see, it's a little atypical. I've got a person on either side of me today, and we are really going to take our real estate show to a new level. We're going to talk some politics, and we're going to talk some topics that really make sense to be talking about right now. And, it's the Hal and Hav show, but we're in the talk version, so it's the Hav and Hal show today. And you ready to go?
I am super ready, but you guys put baby in a corner, and I'm really disappointed.
Don't be disappointed. You sat yourself there.
I did.
Okay, and you brought a guest with us.
I did.
If you wouldn't mind doing a quick introduction.
This is Quinn Smith. He is a candidate for District 3 in the City of Miami Commission election. He's also an attorney. Which we had a little laugh earlier about. What was it?
International arbitration.
That's
so
right.
For those of us that aren't in that legal realm, very briefly, what's an international arbitration attorney do?
Sure. We do private dispute resolution.
Okay.
And it's between companies in different countries or between a company and a country.
Wow. So you're talking with some high profile people who you work with.
That's what the way it tends to be. Big ticket stuff.
Well, big ticket, we're talking maybe even billions, right?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
We have a few of those.
Okay. We have no billionaires in the room.
Well,
perhaps.
I'm not.
Okay. But we are going to talk about some topics that are akin to people that have billions or have hundreds.
or have hundreds.
I'm looking at you.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Hundreds of dollars. And I think also if Quinn, if you could lead into, give us a little bit of background of, what you're doing and what you're planning to do and why'd you get into this whole commission race? I ran one time and it's not easy. It's difficult and you're up against a tough candidate. So give us a little bit of background.
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in West Texas and New Mexico. I learned to speak Spanish after college. I worked as a laborer in construction. Cool. I came here in 2005, went to law school. I graduated, and a year later, I started my own law firm. Oh. And that's a law firm where I still work. It's changed names, but it's the same firm, and we now have 15 lawyers.
And you're running for District 3 in the city of Miami for a commissioner, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And so is that your district, and what area of Miami is District 3?
Sure. So this is the roads. This is Shenandoah between 17th and 12th. Little Havana from 27th going east, basically, to 95. Never goes north of the Dolphin, never crosses the river. And then it's West Brickell. So between 95, the Metro Rail, and south of the river, which used to be East Little Havana.
Right. Got it. And it's an area that's really up and coming and has a lot of value that's being added to it. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that as the elephant in the room, as I like to call it.
Sure.
Which is going to be one of the topics that we're going to talk to. But we'll say that one for the very end.
We've got 3 topics today that we're going to be talking about. And I always ask my audience, if you are out there and you want to have some part of the conversation today, reach out on social media. We're going to look up at the screen periodically. Any questions that you have, please do send them in so that we can address them directly. And even after the show is done, put in those questions. We go back and take a look, and we can answer them offline as well.
Yeah, we sure will.
So, Hav, you wanted to start off with.
I was gonna lead into we had this topic a couple of shows ago that it's really about drainage and septic tanks and how some of them were being compromised. And I know that the city and the county has certain plans in place. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask Quinn as a candidate is to kind of explain what the city is working on to alleviate some of the rising water issues that we have.
Sure.
So, let me know what you got planned so we can see.
Well, there is a storm water master plan that the city has adopted. It has set out a number of areas of sort of priority concern and also described the difference between what the city looks like as the water gets higher. Right. And it is really showing us the choices that we have to make as to what we will protect and how much we will protect it. Yeah. It is going to look at a number of places in my district, specifically in Little Havana. And they are places that some of them have seen flooding for 50 years. Right. So there's one voter, she said, the most important thing to me is the flooding at that intersection. And I've been telling people for 52 years and it hasn't been fixed. So hopefully things like that will get fixed. But then also just the general increase in flooding that we're seeing throughout Little Havana to try to reduce that. A lot of people, they are getting water up sort of about 6 inches from the door frame, whenever it rains hard. So that's kind of often.
That's downright frightening for people that live like that.
Yes.
And we know what the bigger problem is, that there's going to be sea level rise and there's more and more larger storms. So when you're talking about how we're going to fix these things and prioritize, how can you do that? I mean, what is the high level view of how a government can look down on the problem and say, here's how we're going to address this at level 1, level 2, and level 3?
So, I mean, the government can do basic things like topography. What will have the biggest effect and when? The government can do other things like building code. So places that are going to have an effect, what will we require from new development in that area? And then the government also has a role to play in what it prioritizes, right? So, for example, there are parts of Miami, this doesn't really apply in my district, but if you look at Little Haiti and Liberty City, where some of the higher parts of land are some of the poor parts of those districts. And so what is going to happen to those people with our development policies?
As we call it, climate refugees, as they're going to start moving in, especially big money, because they realize that the properties are valued now because of their height, of their they're not affected by sea level rise. Coconut Grove is a good example of that.
Yes.
We're up on Silver Bluff.
Yes.
And we're about 14, 15 feet above sea level.
So you're running for the city commission. How do you and your vision contribute to a changed plan for Miami?
Well, so my vision is that we have to prioritize those people who are not going to be able to adapt. So folks like myself that live in the roads, we have a beautiful neighborhood. We don't really need a lot of city services to adapt for most of climate change. There are some things, but not many. But there are places in Little Havana where you will. And if the city doesn't step in, if the county doesn't step in, if government doesn't step in, then we're going to see lots of flooding, massive property value loss, and those people are going to begin to move, and you're going to just have perhaps abandoned buildings, and the problem begins to get worse at a point where the tax base has already dramatically declined. So you have to look at those areas and sort of, make those areas resilient so that as the sea level rises, we are both protecting the citizens who need to be protected and also preserving the property values that we need to preserve.
And that's a great point, because again, we've talked about in some of the other shows, is that our government, our local government, our county government, they are supported by real estate taxes. That's really the main thing, unless we go to a bond position. But at the end of the day, that's an excellent point about the fact that, yes, some of us that live in certain areas really aren't as affected, but we need to protect those that would really drop in value. And that's a great point, and I think that's really a solid position.
And something to also consider is that there are places in Little Havana where people have been owners for 50 years, 60 years. I think that we owe people who invested at that time, we owe them with our public funds to help them protect the value of their properties.
Yeah, they made the community that is now rising.
Absolutely.
And that's somebody that needs to, it's funny that you mentioned about 50 years of that particular resident. The feds came to Miami and to Miami-Dade County 50 years ago, telling them that they had a water issue, and nothing has been done. And I think up until the 70s, and then they started to go in. And then we talked about it in one of the other shows. I think it was in 90 something that they really just laid down the law and said, you've got to do this.
Yeah.
And we've been ignoring it, for as long as that lady has been complaining for her fish. She's right on, man. Hire her. Let's get her on board.
What I find interesting is Hav and I both have little tricks of the trade in real estate. And one of them is when we're touring and showing homes, we can from the street see if there are drains at the end of a driveway or within a couple, maybe 100 feet of the house, and know, geez, when it rains, stuff is going to happen here. And so when you're talking about prioritizing and addressing the issue for the woman that has had a flooding issue for 52 years, I think you said, does this mean that there are pump stations that have to be put in? The drainage has to be improved? a combination of both. What happens in order to address people in
Sure.
Little Havana?
So there's going to be pumps.
Yeah.
You have to make pipes bigger to handle more water. You have to find ways to deal with the trash. So there's so much trash on the streets that it clogs up the drains. And then once the drains are clogged, they just back up.
Right.
So that's not necessarily a part of the plan. That needs to be a part of our response to support the plan. But those are some of the things that we're going to see. You can't just lift a whole community by a foot. That's not going to happen.
Right. What is the ideas on how to fund this? And I assume it's not a small price tag in order to address this issue.
That's correct. Well, I mean, there is the Miami Forever bond that was issued. There is state funding that can be available. There is federal funding that can be available. And I think that we're also going to have to, as a community, decide what we are going to pay for and where. And those are going to be some tough decisions for us, but all the money isn't there now. But there definitely will be no money available if our property values collapse and the tax base dries up. So we're going to have to make some of those choices.
I think that's another, it's a solid point. Those choices have to be made. They're going to be a hard decision. And I think really in reality, that's where government can step in and do good. And I think that's one of the opportunities. I wanted to ask you another question to not get off topic, but we've had in other shows too, where we've talked about how tree canopy adds value to property values. It could be as high as 30%. So in your particular district, which I know well, I do business in there, and you have some places where you don't have that canopy, but you also have other issues that I know that are out there. And give us a heads up. What are the things that are out there that we as a government, as public policy, can solve to add value to properties?
Sure. Well, I'll briefly touch on trees because the issue of trees, it's really interesting whenever you look at it on the ground. So perhaps in the roads, maybe in Coconut Grove, we have big swales, and so we have big trees, and it doesn't really impact your house. But if you don't have a swale, where's that tree going to go? And if you put a tree there, what's going to happen to it? It may not be what you're looking for. And if the tree isn't maintained and it knocks down the power lines, people don't like the trees anymore. And so I think there's a lot of things that the government can do in that space. I mean, tree maintenance is crucial. So I talked to a woman, the last hurricane, which was Hurricane Irma, lost power for 16 days. She lives 2 blocks from Cayocho. So you can see, you don't have to go very far where your primary concern is you don't want the tree because you are worried about the tree because you don't want to be without power for 16 days. And so I think tree maintenance is overlooked as a valuable service that can be provided so that people want to have trees. Expanding swales where people want to have trees because they're not going to destroy their house.
It's funny. When I ran for District 2, there's a little area called Golden Pines.
Okay.
And it was the same thing. And you knock on doors and you just, how can you get rid of that tree?
Yeah.
And then it's like, if you try that in Coconut Grove, and it was like, you're toast.
Yeah.
So it's actually important to note how different from a cultural standpoint, from a district standpoint, that some of the policies that are put in place and you feel, oh, these are good policies, you're going to get this pushback. Your district has the need for cars. So they want parking. So they don't want a tree. And they don't have the access for it. So that's, it's very interesting that, a lot of everybody tries to make it, in our business, everything has to be the same for value. And in our public policy, it's completely different.
Yeah.
Any other things out there that you think would?
I mean, something that the municipality, and I think this is to be a municipal thing, but also a culture shift on our part, is the trash.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of dumping is incredible. It's out of control. I mean, if there's a sign that says no dumping, chances are there's a sofa in front of it. Yeah. Because there is the chances of the enforcement is quite lax, or people are dumping at night, and that trash on the street has a lot of negative impacts. If you're a property owner, maybe you're getting fines. And you're frustrated because you're saying, hey, look, I cannot pick up on the trash. The city's got to help me out here. So there's that. If you're a tenant and you live nearby, you don't want to see all the rats, the raccoons, the smell All of those things, of course, are going to impact your quality of life. And if you own the buildings nearby with the tenants, that doesn't help your property values when people walk by and they see a mound of trash that is 3 feet high.
So how do you address that? Again, you're running for District 3.
Yes.
And you want to try to work on this problem.
Yes.
And we all see it. The sign's there and it's surrounded by trash, right?
Yes.
So does the city go on a program that they're out there on a regular basis automatically? Do you still have to call it in? How do you address this? What's your plan?
So there's a few things that we have to do. One thing is that from a leadership perspective, I'm going to be out picking up trash because there's lots of candy wrappers on the ground, and that's individuals, that's citizens that are putting the trash on the ground, and we have to change that ourselves. But the other thing that we have to start to do is that we have to help educate folks as to when bulk trash pickup is. A lot of people don't know, and some of these neighborhoods turnover is pretty high. People are moving in and out, and they just don't know when bulk trash is, and so they just throw it out there. We do need to have better enforcement. And it might require hanging out at nighttime and watching people, dump a bunch of trash. I don't want to go out and I don't want to find people who can't really afford to pay fines. Because you're not really helping folks by doing that. But we do need to help to shift behavior by letting people know that this is not acceptable. And all of us care about that, not just the property owner or the person next door, but we all care because there is a decent amount of trash that is dumped by people who don't live in the district, who come in at the truck, middle of the night, and they throw their sofas out.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had a conversation with the mayor of Coral Gables, and one of the things that he was trying to implement was that, because what ends up happening is the yard cuttings.
Okay.
What they do is they know that the Gables is going to pick up, so the gardeners go cut grass and then dump it in the Gables. And they dump it in the Gables as their last stop. And it's funny, Vince came up with a plan to say, if you put it in your driveway, we will pick it up. It could, and he actually used the space shuttle. You can put the space shuttle there. We're going to pick it up.
We're going to pick it up.
To try to get rid of the swales of the, those swale packets. And it's funny that you mentioned that about bulk pickup and about fining. One of the things, and I love the point about not fining people because you are really taxing people that can't afford that. But from an educational standpoint, I have a tenant in one of my properties, and actually he called me up and said, "Hey, I want to put bulk trash out." And I said, "Listen, you have two options. You can call 311, you call the net office, see when you can put it out if you do it, or you have a certain time frame." But I think that educational component, especially in your district that has a lot of tenants, that has a lot of turnover, and maybe it's as simple as putting it on the building owners. Just say, "Hey, listen, guys, can you help us, kind of get some information out there?" And I think that's a big deal.
I agree with you. Now, some buildings do. Most buildings don't.
No.
I mean,
small buildings.
I go in lots of buildings and I don't see the many reminders. There are no outside reminders, which can also be helpful. Having a sign where people can see, that might also help them. Especially if they're new to the area, to know that it's when you can do it and when you can't.
So let me push the issue a little bit, because you said, maybe we need to be looking at people in the middle of the night and finding out where and how this gets dumped. But that's a heavy cost. If you're going to use the police force, they're getting paid at a pretty good rate per hour. What is your thought process about using cameras positioned somewhere, either by the city deploying those cameras, or maybe even a large building putting a camera out there in order to catch people that are doing this?
Sure. I think that the cameras would be fine. But as a first step, I think it's important just to interact with people, to let them know before we make a massive investment in cameras and then begin just the ticketing of people because you saw their license plate. We have to remember that these are humans, and and there are lots of examples of what happens whenever you over penalize a community. You have a lot of negative side effects, suspended licenses, that kind of thing, which hurts their ability to make income. So I would say you need to have a mixture of it. Now, there could be spots that are just hot spots where there is just nonstop dumping, and then maybe a camera is appropriate because we need to do something.
And again, trying to be the guy that just pushes the limit a little bit on the question. You put out cameras potentially, and then of course a lot of people would say, well, that's a police state, right? I'm being seen all the time. We're trying to solve potentially one of the problems, which is dumping. If there's pressure to use those cameras for other things, what's your position on using those cameras for more than just making sure this
Yeah.
issue is addressed?
I'm going to interject really
Sure.
quick. District 3, you cannot police state. I can tell you that right now.
Okay.
But again, I'm sorry to cut it, but
No, I'm
District
just
3
curious
is.
have
about
a,
what your
you have
what your
a
take is on
valid
cameras.
point, and I think that a couple of things is that, of course, you can limit how you use them. You can use them for a short period of time, and you can also just make sure that we're not going to collect other kinds of information on people. The final thing is that there are so many Ring cameras. I mean, there are so many cameras on people's doors that the
And
notion that we can walk down the
And
street.
that is a network onto its own. Yes, you're
Absolutely.
correct.
That we
Tell
can
us
walk down
as
the street.
realtors, we know that.
I'm sure you know. So it
Absolutely.
has been a surprise to me how many cameras I've talked to as I
Yes,
knock on
that's
doors.
true.
I think the educational component, and even like going back to Hal's point about if you do have a hot spot, then you turn it into an educational spot afterwards. To give them a break. Like it's almost like you come in with you lead in with a carrot and then you can come back with a stick. But I think in those hot areas, I had that happen to one of the properties that I manage, and it's an alleyway. And we
Okay.
briefly talked about this.
Yes,
It's
you
an
had mentioned this
alleyway.
on the prior show as well.
Yeah, and they dumped tires on there, and I went to the county, and the county says, "Well, you got to maintain the alley." And I'm thinking, hold on a second. So I have a 20-foot alley. I'm responsible for 10. So do I just move the tires over to the other side and let him deal with it? And it's incredible
Or just
that
off the tires.
and yeah, it's incredible thing. So we basically have a sign there that says you're on camera.
Uh-huh.
And we put up a fence on an alleyway, which is probably against code,
Yeah.
but no one's going to say anything. And it's one of the most difficult things that we have.
Was it effective, the camera in the fence? Okay.
Absolutely. Very. It again, it puts out notice first.
Sure.
And then this is illegal dumping, not like in some of the cases that you have that's actually residents that just don't know the
Sure.
time frame, or the fact that they can't do it.
Yes.
Because we get that a lot as realtors when we
Mhm.
turn a house over
Mhm.
and you're going for the final walkthrough and there's mounds of stuff outside. And it's like, hey, whoa, you can't do
Time
this. You can't do this. Oh, well, we did. And it's like, okay, well, now you got a new person, that's coming in and inheriting, unless you like the couch that's out there and take it home.
You must be a college student.
Exactly. I think we got a few minutes to.
We definitely do. Your
So-
third topic is oh, look at that! Rubs his hands together. He's ready to go.
All right.
It's one of the topics that always comes up, especially in the city of Miami and county. And we've also talked about this on and off, and it's always the elephant in the room when we're
Mhm.
talking, to any type of individual that's looking at public service.
Yeah.
And the affordability issue in Miami-Dade,
Mhm.
and we're going to be specific to the district.
Okay.
We can touch on a little bit of the city of Miami, and there are programs out there that are available.
Yes.
There are some things that we as public figures can do.
Yes.
So give our audience some ideas as to what the city of Miami has in place and what it can do to affect some affordability issues that we have in the city.
Sure. So, I mean, the city does have a master plan to address affordable housing, and the city does have tools at its disposal in the context of what taxes it charges and what it negotiates in the context of any variance.
Right.
The city also has the zoning code, and it can upzone for certain things in certain places to increase density. And the city also can help with transportation. So whenever you upzone, of course, and you have more people, how are you going to get them in and out? And that also has to do with transportation. And then I think the final thing the city has is the city has a voice. We can push our weight around to try to get things done. Now, when we go through all those things, there's also permitting. I'll put that as sixth. I see a lot of areas for improvement. So permitting, for example, if I talk to affordable housing developers, they say their permitting takes 1.5 years. Time is money. If it takes you 1.5 years to get started, it makes it that much harder for you to bring the product online. So one is cutting that time. Let's talk about our advocacy. The state of Florida has a fund, the Sadowski Trust Fund, that is supposed to be for affordable housing. And every year it gets rated to pay for something else. If the municipalities, because the municipalities suffer, the state legislature tours don't suffer as much. But we go in and we see the people that need housing,
Right.
and we see what their life is like. If municipalities around the state got together and said, you know what, stop,
Stop rating it.
that's going to have an impact, because then there's more money available to buy the land to help get the affordable housing up. You can also look at the variance issue, and what is required in the context of a requested variance. And the city of Miami can say, we're going to require mixed use housing, right? I haven't met a single person who is against new development. But what they don't like is they don't like it whenever the new development means they're going to lose their place to live, right?
Yeah.
And so in a lot of contexts, you're talking about people who live nearby, but they live in smaller buildings. It isn't like we're talking about moving 1,000 people. We're talking about moving maybe 25, 30, 40 people. And I think that that's doable in the context of some of the variances that you seek. You have also the master plan that I mentioned.
Right.
There is a housing finance corporation that is proposed. The city can create its own corporation that then can be used to leverage outside assets to purchase property to help affordable housing go up. And the final thing is that there are a number of small units that need to be rehabbed, or small construction that can be built, 8 to 60 units. We don't need our big developers to do that.
Right.
We have lots of small businesses, mid-level contractors. The people that really make this town go, that is perfect for them. The city can bid those out directly as a way to restore housing, preserve a lot of historic housing that we have in Little Havana, and really help our small and medium-sized businesses.
I think that group of individuals that you just mentioned are the ones that should be served with financing abilities, as long as it's not in crypto. We're not going to talk about
No crypto.
I think it's crucial that as the city develops plans, that they don't really just target the big developers, but they look, especially in your district, in District 3, District 4, which are two districts that or District 1 also very entrepreneurial, very active, and you look at them and you say to themselves, listen, if you can get these small owners to be able to and again, one of the things you mentioned too is about we tend to forget that something that was built in the 40s or 50s is antiquated. It's past its useful life. You and I know that as real estate agents, and you get beat up for it because somebody will say it's historic, but again, cast iron plumbing ain't historic, and it's not, and lead-based paint ain't historic, and I would tell you that jalousie windows or knob and tube electrical. So I think what ends up happening is if we as from a city position, put it out there that you can help small developers, because the big developers, man, they know every angle. They know how to get anything done. But the small guys really don't. And they really bump up against heads. And sometimes they just say, what the heck with it? I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think the city, from a government standpoint, and from public service, I think that's one of the things that would be ideal.
You spoke about at the very beginning the permit process, and that it takes maybe even a year and a half to get started.
Yes.
And that's true in a lot of areas. How do you cut that time? Because truly there's a lot of money that gets spent on property taxes and plans and other things, that if you can cut that time, it becomes far more valuable to the developer or the rehabber, and therefore they could potentially pass on some savings so that the affordable housing actually happens.
Yes.
So how do you address that?
So some of the things that I've just talking to people that I think would be helpful. First, a lot of smaller permits, we need to find ways to get those done really quickly. It can even be in paper so that it gets done, because a lot of those little ones, they clog up the system. I wanted to put up a fence in our backyard. It took over 30 inspections to put up a fence 2 feet from the property line. I'm not blaming anyone. Everyone's doing their job. But if it takes that many inspections and that long and costs us that much, then that's a burden on those existing resources that we could remove. So I think smaller permits you got to pull out. Second, you got to find a way to be more efficient. So the fence example, there were 30 different inspections on a fence. The fence had no electric, it had no plumbing. It's just a fence. A lot of unnecessary inspections, a lot of resources dedicated to something where they shouldn't be. Now, hopefully, once you clear those things out, when you get to bigger projects, there is more time to get them done more quickly, right? Within that context, you can prioritize affordable developments and say these have to be done within whatever. Give me the reasonable time. I'm not an affordable housing developer, but give me the reasonable time. Is it 6 months? And then when the city says we're going to do it in 6 months, and then that way people have that expectation from their government, and they can trust their government that it's going to get done. If you can trust the government, then you are more likely to invest. If you can't trust them, then you are not only less likely to invest, but you're going to invest in something where you're only going to get a much higher return,
Exactly.
right? Because you have to make up for the uncertainties. And so it's going to push you away from your affordable projects to your more market rate ones because, hey, I need the bigger margin.
Right. It also does something too from a development standpoint is that the developers know you can miss a market. You can miss a market
Absolutely.
cycle. And that's really one of the critical standpoints. So if you know that you're going to be getting something within 6 months, I know the city went and they started getting big projects and taking them outside so that it was reviewed by somebody else but I still think that the safety issues still come back to the city. I don't know if that's finalized or whatever, but the key I think is that if the city says, okay, an affordable building of, 12 stories is going to be a 6-month project, something like that, then the developer can actually, from our standpoint, from a real estate standpoint, we can plan out and say, okay, I've got 6 months that I know I'm going to be permitting, I'm going to be breaking ground, or you can prep properties, you can prep things to get things going. So I think that's that's something that would be extremely helpful from a development side and from a real estate side.
Agreed. Listen, I apologize. This has been an incredibly fast 30 minutes. We got to know a lot about you, Quinn Smith.
Well, thank you.
We appreciate you coming by.
I have one more question.
One more question, and I want to give him 30 seconds to speak out to our audience over there in camera 3.
Sure.
Why should they be voting for you?
Okay.
And it's November 2nd, right?
Yes.
Right over there. Tell them, and
All
then
right.
we can finish up with the last question.
All right. Thank you. So I believe in the power of public service. I believe that we can do a lot of good, especially on a local level. And the stories that I described today are the kinds of things that I'm going to be fighting for. I would really appreciate your votes. I want to show you that the city can do a good job and that you can count on us for solutions. So November 2nd, early voting starts October 23rd. Mail-in ballots go out in only a couple of weeks. And you can find me on quinnformiami.com.
Great. Thank you. And last question.
Easy.
Let's hit them one more time.
Bills or Dolphins?
I mean, it's got to be the fans.
Okay.
That was an easy one.
That was an easy one. That was
Softball.
simple. Quinn, a pleasure, man. Thank you for joining us.
We're always here for real estate. We know that what happens at our city government certainly affects what's going on in real estate. So thank you for potentially looking to serve our community. And we obviously would love to have people know more about you so they can, again, ask questions through the medium that we're using, which are several social media platforms. Hav, thanks for bringing them in.
You got it.
And
thank you, guys.
This wraps up another Miami Hal Real Estate Show. We'll see you next week.
Take it easy, guys. Have a good week.